Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I made this building, which happens to be the first completed structure for my as yet unnamed model railway. This structure, as you can probably tell, started life as a Northern Light and Power kit from Walthers, obviously in N scale. It is a North American structure, and I am modelling British railways, but I think it's generic enough that it should be fine. I thought it would be a good structure to hide the switches for my powered points that you can see in the corner here. In hindsight, it might be a bit better to mount that switch console thingy around the other way, but it's a bit late now. Oh well. I'm not going to go over what's in the box like I normally would in a build video, and I'm not going to be using most of the stuff in here anyway. If you are looking for a proper build video of this kit, I'm sure somebody else has done one. The first thing I did was take the base of the structure and mark where it's going to sit on the layout. It might be a little bit close to the track, but it's probably fine, really. I was initially kind of hoping I could use both long sides of this building to make a square structure, but I didn't really think that would fit, so a rectangular building it is. The base plate is obviously one solid piece, and that will probably interfere with the operation of the switches, so it has to be cut. I've obviously done this cutting in the most professional and not at all dodgy way. It doesn't look very neat, but it does the job, and I've now got an L-shaped base which I can glue the walls to. It's probably not totally necessary, but I found it helpful. Next came some test fitting, and a little bit of disappointment. I wanted to use this door, and not the roller door. I feel like a roller door is a bit too modern looking. Unfortunately, this doorway is a little bit too tall, so I had to use the other end wall, without the smaller door at the left. I suppose I could have done some plastic surgery to get exactly what I wanted, but I guess I didn't really want it that much. Another error, though not an especially important one, is now the base is wrong. You can see there's a sort of protrusion, I guess for a step, for both doors. Who cares? Probably nobody. I did, for a couple of seconds, until I realised it doesn't really matter. Moving on, I glue the two wall sections together. They're beveled, so it's pretty easy to get this right. It makes sense to then glue the wall parts to the base. As I said before, it's not totally necessary, but it will give a bit of extra strength and some stability. And for even more strength, I added a length of styrene inside the corner, and a big thick chunk it is. If I was to illuminate the inside of this structure, this would probably also help prevent light from leaking out through any gaps in the corner. I am going to light this building, but only on the outside. I'll be using one of these just plug wall mount lights, and in order to wall mount it, there should be a hole. Simple enough. To avoid doing the landlord special and just painting over the light, I'll be installing that later. Now that all that's done, I figured it might be a good idea to put this on the layout and think about its positioning. I did consider mounting it at an angle, but at the time, having not yet installed the foam or tunnel that will be on that corner, I wasn't sure it would work. It may, and I may still do that, but probably not. The main point of this test fitting was to think about the roof, and figure out if I wanted to install the entire roof, or just half of it, or no roof at all. It seemed like I'd be able to get my hand in, and flip the switches with the entire roof in place, so that's what I went with. The roof has some internal support parts. The main reason I've used them is because I figured it would be a little bit more difficult to put the roof together without them. I guess if I was building all 4 walls, this would be a bit easier. It's not especially difficult, and I had the roof together in short order. I added a few more bits of styrene on the inside for extra strength. I feel like the roof has potential to be knocked by hands going inside to switch the switches, so the more bits holding it together the better. It was also a little bit gappy on top. Not too bad, but not perfect either. Instead of using putty, I thought, why not add more styrene? I felt like it looked a bit more interesting to add this right angle piece to make a kind of cap, I guess you might call it. It is a simple little thing, but I feel like it made the roof look a bit more interesting. To give it something a bit more certain and stronger to be glued onto, I added some chunks of styrene to the short wall, being careful to line them up with the thin guides moulded into the part. It's not glued together yet, but this is what it looks like so far. The kit does come with some vent things for the roof, but they weren't very good, so at this point I decided to omit them, but over time I figured I could order some 3D printed details, so I did. This was of course before I'd bought my own 3D printer. Anyway, I don't know if you can tell, but I'd primed the roof at this point and then decided that I would remove 3 of the vent mounts. I then glued these vents into place. I'm not entirely sure that they're historically accurate for the time period I'm modelling, They don't look too technological. I mostly chose them because they looked interesting. I used 4 of them, because that's all I had, and 1 curved exhaust vent, just for a bit of variety and interest. As you can see, I've then primed the vents and the sanded patches of the roof in black, mostly because the black was slightly closer than the grey that I'd previously used, and then it seemed like the time was right to begin painting. I base coated the roof in Vallejo model colour dark grey, which seemed to me like a pretty sensible colour for this kind of roof. I'm applying a fairly solid coat, though not completely solid. There is still a bit of patchiness from the mix of black and grey primers showing through, which I feel helps make it look more convincing and almost pre-weathered. I'm not looking to model a fresh, new, clean structure, so completely solid colours aren't really what I'm after. I then sprayed a highlight with a mix of roughly 1 part dark grey and 1 part model colour light grey. I'm doing this fairly lightly and in a pattern that, at least in my mind, looks like fading and almost streaking down the roof. The colours are fairly subtle, but that's what I like. Next, I base coated the walls with scale 75 Kalahari orange, which I bought specifically because I thought it was a nice colour for bricks. And it is. Though it is a bit solid and uninteresting by itself. We'll fix that later. While I've got the airbrush out, I figured, why not do the windows? I chose a base coat of Vallejo model colour Prussian blue, and I sprayed most of the windows on the sprue, which isn't something I would normally do, but the only part of these that's going to be visible is the front, and the sprue makes a pretty good holder. I then sprayed a mix of roughly 2 parts Prussian blue and 1 part model colour sky blue. I spray this from above, the idea being to create a sort of sun-faded look. And that's the base coats done. Time to try and make those bricks look a bit more interesting. I did experiment with some different sponge techniques and such. That is the bonus of not using all of the walls, you get some test pieces, but I settled on picking out individual bricks with a few different colours. The first of which is model colour Hull Red, and it's exactly what it looks like, using a small brush to slowly pick out individual bricks. The second colour I chose was model colour Cavalry Brown. I wasn't counting or anything, but I painted about the same amount of bricks as the previous colour. I am trying to keep the paint on each individual brick, but it is okay if it's a little bit messy. Trying to be too perfect will slow you down, and this is, as you can imagine, already a time-consuming process. The third colour was model colour Black Red, which seems to be somewhere between the first 2 colours. I did a few less bricks with this colour, because I do want most of them to be the original base colour. The final colour was Vallejo model Air Light Rust. Initially I wasn't sure if this one would work, but I think it does. So, on it goes. As I said, I did try to be neat with this, and because of that it does take a fair while to do. I would recommend doing this kind of thing over a few sessions while watching something entertaining. Maybe a nice Herbert Erpaderp video. Huh? The next thing I did was apply a dry brushing, a fairly light one with scale 75 Mars Orange. I started off really lightly with this because I wasn't totally sure how well it would work, and it is quite easy to overdo this kind of thing. Then once I was feeling more confident, I went a little bit heavier, eventually getting the result I wanted. The idea here is that the dry brush will catch the edge of the bricks, making them look a bit neater, while also adding a bit of fading and colour variance, and kind of blending everything together. I feel like it's pretty effective. Now, mortar. There are other ways you could do this, of course, like applying paint and then wiping it off the surface of the bricks, but I saw somebody using a powder of some sort. I've forgotten exactly what they were using, maybe tiling grout, I don't know. I decided to try it with dry pigment. I've got some of these sitting around that I never use, so why not? This is concrete pigment from MIG. I've just kind of plopped it onto the bricks and rubbed it in. You can use a brush or your finger to rub it in, though I would say using fingers works a bit better. I then wipe it off the bricks, hoping the pigment will remain in the gaps. At first I used a bit of wet foam, and initially it was probably a little bit too wet. It did sort of work, but it also removed a bit more of the mortar than I wanted it to. So I did it again. This time the foam was a little bit less wet. Still not satisfied, I tried again, and this time I used a very slightly damp piece of paper towel. This seemed to work pretty well, so that's what I used from then on. It's definitely not perfect, and it's probably not really the best technique to use for N-scale, mostly because the gap between the bricks isn't very deep, and in some areas the moulding isn't quite perfect, so there's even less of a gap than there should be, like in some of the windowsill areas and the lower right part of the front wall. There is a bit of pigment still on the bricks, but that's okay. It's actually kind of free weathering. Once I was as satisfied as I thought I was going to be, I painted the trim, or whatever you would call this bit. For this, I used model color neutral grey. This is pretty simple. The bit along the bottom is slightly raised compared to the bricks, so while you do still have to be careful, it's not too hard to get a nice straight edge with no masking. I also painted all of the other, I don't know what you'd call them, I'm not a structure scientist, but I painted all of the non-brick bits with the neutral grey as well. I did the inside of the wall above the roofline with this colour too. I almost forgot about that. That would have been quite the blunder indeed. I think the grey looks pretty good, though it does look way too clean and tidy, so I apply some dry brushing with model colour light grey. I'm using this card as a shield so that I don't get any of this grey onto the bricks. A little bit of grey on the bricks would probably be fine, but not too much. I dry brushed all of the grey bits, though I didn't feel there was quite so much a need for the shield on the windowsills and such. I also dry brushed the roof with the same colour, focusing on the ridge in the centre, and downward streaks following where I assumed the rainwater would go, as commanded by gravity. I follow that by painting the roof vents. I figured these might be a metallic colour, so I used scale 75 black metal, which isn't quite as grim and frostbitten as the name might suggest. It is a good colour though. Then, while test fitting the windows, I figured they looked a little bit too clean, so I applied a dry brushing to those too. For this I'm using plain model colour sky blue. Again, dry brushed downwards, so the majority of this colour ends up on the upper surfaces. I also wasn't super happy with the colour of the mortar. I think it's a little bit bright. I didn't want to brush it out of the gaps by brushing a wash over it, so I figured why not try spritzing it on with one of these little squirty things from an isopropyl alcohol bottle. The colour I used was Army Painted Dark Tone, mixed roughly 50-50 with water. It was a bit messy, but the overall result is fairly good. The next thing I did was to make the sign. The building does come with decals, but I didn't really want a Northern Light and Power or any of the other names either. This building is going to hide switches, so I thought why not make it a switch factory, thus Amalgamated Switch Suppliers. I designed and 3D printed the sign myself. I primed it, and then base coated it with Vallejo model color ivory. Leaving the sign on its supports functioned quite well as a handle. I then picked out the lettering and the border with model color Prussian blue. In theory, the raised letters make this quite easy, but they are only 0.5 mm tall, so you do still have to be fairly careful. I did have to do a couple of touch-ups, but it wasn't the most difficult thing in the world. I wanted to highlight this, and I used sky blue for that, just like with the windows. Initially I tried to do that with a regular brush, but it was too stark looking. So I very carefully dry brushed it, and the result is a bit more subtle than I wanted, but it'll do. To make things look more dirty, I applied a wash of roughly 1 part Army Painter Soft Tone to 1 part water. This tends to collect around the raised letters and borders, so I removed a bit of it so it wouldn't be too heavy in those areas. At this point I've glued the windows into place, added a coat of matte varnish, and painted the internal walls black. I just used some cheap black craft paint for this. The inside of this building won't be illuminated, but I felt like painting it black on the inside would make it look a bit more convincing anyway, just in case you get close enough to see inside the windows. I then removed the sign from its supports and glued it into place. And in all honesty, I'm quite surprised I got it into place straight and neat first go. I then turned my attention to the roof. I thinned out some Vallejo Model Air Light Rust with water, roughly 1 part paint to 2 parts water, so it is quite thin. I applied this around the base of the vent mounting things. The vents look like they might be stainless, I don't know, but I'm assuming the bolts and mounting plates and all of that stuff would be steel and would probably rust. The thin paint tends to capillary action itself into the corners here and around the bolt parts. I also gently streak it down the roof. You can see there's some areas where I added water to allow the paint to thin itself out even more on the model. I'm not going for abandoned and decrepit, so I'm trying not to go too far with this. A little bit can go a long way, therefore it's quite easy to go too far, and I think I've managed to add a bit of rusty interest without it being too stark or jumping out at you. Then, it seemed like as good a time as any to glue the roof into place. I didn't video it, but I did make sure to apply plenty of glue to appease the glue god. The chunks of styrene bar that I added to the short wall were especially helpful here. With the roof nicely in place, it's time for a bit more weathering, but nothing too extreme. I got the Army Painted Dark Tone out again, and mixed it roughly 50-50 with water. maybe slightly more than half water. My mixes are very rarely precise. This is more or less just kind of slapped on, and then brushed in the direction gravity would pull it. It's nothing too special, this is just to darken and dirty everything down a bit. The reason I used a matte varnish under this, rather than gloss, is because I wanted to add this colour to everything. Gloss would have encouraged the wash to bead off of it and collect in the gaps. Matte varnish doesn't do that. I let that dry and then had a bit of a think about it. I came to the conclusion that I wanted a bit more streakiness, so I used dark tone again, only this time it was straight out of the bottle with no dilution. I'm just adding a few slightly darker streaks down the roof and the walls, mostly coming down from the sign and the windows. Like with the rust, I'm trying not to go overboard with it. I then applied another layer of matte varnish just to kill off any shine caused by the dark tone. It also very slightly lightens all of the colours. You can see here that I've now added some window glazing. The kit did come with some clear parts for this purpose, but it was quicker and easier just to glue some acetate sheet into place. You can see the clear acetate sheet adds a shine, but is otherwise nice and see-through. It did occur to me that I might want dusty windows, so I might dust them up in the future. Alternately, we can just say that the windows in this building are kept nice and clean, even though the outside is pretty dirty. There is one final detail to add: the light. The lampshade is green, which doesn't really fit with my blue windows and doors, so I paint that with model color Prussian blue. The pole arm bit, or whatever you want to call that, is a bit too bright looking too, so I painted that with scale 75 black metal. This looks much better. This is really simple to install. You run the wires through the hole in the wall. One thing I noticed as I did this was that the wire doesn't actually run through the center of the arm bit, it's off to one side. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to take into consideration when drilling mounting holes. I use a small dot of superglue and then put the light into place. The arm bit can be bent if you need to adjust this, though I probably wouldn't bend it too much. I could see it breaking fairly easily. I used some blue tack to temporarily hold the wires to the wall, or acetate sheet in this case, and then I wrapped the wire back on the little cardboard holder thing that it came on. Blue tacking that inside the structure will keep it neat and out of the way until I'm ready to install the building. Obviously, I did test the light to make sure it worked, and it did. The Woodland Scenics Just Plug light system has a dimming feature, which I think is pretty cool. I'm not an electricity surgeon, so this system, while a little bit expensive, does make things rather easy. It's just a simple light, but I found it really satisfying. And with that, the Amalgamated Switch Suppliers in N scale, built from about half a Walthers Northern Light and Power kit, is now completed. Or mostly completed anyway. There's a little bit more weathering that I could do, but I feel like it's best to wait for that until after I've got the building installed and the surrounding area at least mostly in place. That way I can blend the building in with its surroundings. I don't anticipate adding too much more to it though. That is also the main reason I haven't glued the building down yet, other than not having had time to even go there and sit the model in place over the switches that'll hide. I feel like it's probably going to be better to not have the structure rigidly in place when it comes time to designing and fitting the areas around it. I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do there yet either, but it is probably going to be some sort of paved area with various bits of industrial doodaddery, maybe a bunch of crates and the like, perhaps a forklift. At any rate, I'm quite happy with the results I've got here. It's nothing super fancy, I suppose, but it doesn't have to be. It looks convincing. The sign is mildly amusing without being obviously childish, and I'm really pleased with the light. I am a simple man. I'm really excited to have my first building finished, even if it's not actually in place yet. It'll probably take me years to get all of the rest of the structures ready, so this feels like a huge first step. I think the next step is going to be signaling, then ballasting. The good news is that some of the signals I've ordered are on their way. That is of course a different video though. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. Subscribe if you'd like to see more of this kind of thing, and if you really like what I do, and you'd like to see my videos a bit early, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links are in the description. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.